Hello, and welcome to the Channel of Stories. Dear listeners, before we start the story, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like and share in the comments where you are from. Thank you. Here we go.
I, 29F, wasn't supposed to be in Paris that spring. The trip was a hastily booked escape from a 13-year marriage that had quietly disintegrated into emotional starvation. I needed air, something new to breathe, something that didn't remind me of duty or disappointment. That Thursday, it was raining. Not the kind of downpour that makes you dash for cover, but the gentle, moody kind that makes you walk slower. Paris in the rain is like a watercolor painting left out too long, blurred, romantic, and somehow more honest. I was heading down Rue de l'Université on my lunch break, umbrella in hand, half listening to the hum of the city, when it hit me, the scent. Warm, floral, with a spicy ginger twist and something old, like yellowing pages of a treasured book. It wrapped around me like a memory I didn't know I had. I stopped walking mid-stride, almost causing the woman behind me to bump into me. She mumbled something in French, annoyed, but I didn't hear it. I was somewhere else. Ahead, a tall man in a trench coat walked steadily, umbrella tilting just slightly in the breeze. I couldn't see his face. Just his back. His gait was unhurried, confident. Not rushed like everyone else trying to escape the drizzle. He moved like someone who belonged here. Someone who didn't need to check Google Maps to know where he was going. I felt something between my ribs shift. I followed. 20 meters behind. Just close enough to keep inhaling that scent. My heart was beating harder than it should have been for a man I didn't know. I kept telling myself it was just curiosity. Just a perfume I liked. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was like stumbling into a dream you didn't remember falling asleep into. I followed him for 2 blocks, past a row of art galleries and a tiny florist spilling violets onto the sidewalk. He ducked into a corner bakery. I hovered outside, pretending to study the chalkboard menu. I felt ridiculous. What was I doing? Was I really trailing a stranger because of how he smelled? Yes. Yes, I was. Because that scent wasn't just lovely. It was arresting. It was the kind of smell that made you close your eyes and inhale like you were trying to drink it in. Like maybe if you held it long enough, something inside you would be healed. He left the bakery carrying a small paper bag and disappeared down a side street before I could follow again. I just stood there, staring at the empty corner, feeling like something important had slipped through my fingers. I know how it sounds. Creepy. Weird. Maybe it was. But I had to know. Who was he? What scent was that? And why, in that moment, did it feel like I already knew him? The next day, Friday, I returned to that little stretch of Rue de l'Université, walking slower than usual, half hoping the scent would find me again. Nothing. Just the usual symphony of roasted chestnuts, wet cobblestones, and cafe smoke. My head knew it was silly to expect anything. But my heart, still quietly hopeful, had other plans. It wasn't until the following Thursday that I found him again. Or rather, he found me. I ducked into a bookstore I'd passed a dozen times but never entered. It was the kind of place that seemed built for hiding in, narrow aisles, wooden shelves, an old iron spiral staircase that creaked like it had a personality. The kind of shop where time forgets you. And then the scent. Again. It was sudden, like turning a corner and being hit with sunlight. I froze. My eyes scanned the room and there he was, tucked into a leather armchair in the back, reading a French translation of The Little Prince. I don't know why, but that made my chest tighten. There was something disarmingly tender about it. A grown man reading Saint-Exupéry in a dusty old bookstore? Come on. I pretended to browse nearby, pulling out a collection of Baudelaire poems I didn't intend to buy. My heart was hammering again. I could feel the heat climbing my neck, and I cursed myself silently for reacting like a schoolgirl with a crush. This wasn't me. I wasn't the type to pine from across a room. But then he looked up. His eyes met mine with the same gentle calm as his scent. He didn't look startled or even curious. Just amused. Like he'd been waiting. And then, he smiled. It was subtle, the kind of smile you only give someone you recognize, even if you're not supposed to. It knocked the wind out of me. I smiled back. And just like that, he closed the book, stood up, and walked out. No words. No introductions. Just that smile. Like a whisper shared between strangers who knew something no one else did. That became our rhythm. Every week, the same bookstore. Always around lunch. He'd be there before me, already settled in with some book that always had a worn cover and a spine that looked like it had been broken more than once. He never approached. Neither did I. But there was always the smile. Always the scent. And always that sense that something unsaid was growing between us. I started calling him Monsieur Gingembre, in my head, Mr. Ginger. Because of the perfume, obviously, but also because there was a warmth and slight spice to him, something familiar but hard to place. I told myself it was just a game. A harmless distraction from my real life, work, the kids, the divorce paperwork still waiting in a drawer back home. But the truth? I was starting to look forward to Thursdays more than anything else. Like a teenager counting down to prom. Only I didn't even know his name. Sometimes, I'd stand outside the bookstore for 5 or 10 minutes before going in, nervous that he might not be there. That the spell would break. But he always was. Until he wasn't. He didn't show up that Thursday. I stood in the bookstore for nearly an hour, pretending to be absorbed in a travel guide to Morocco while my eyes flicked toward the entrance every time the door creaked. I even walked upstairs, browsed the philosophy section, and thumbed through books I didn't understand just to kill time. But he never came. At first, I told myself he was just running late. That maybe he got caught in a meeting, or missed the metro, or was holed up somewhere else, sipping coffee and reading something by Camus. People have lives. People miss appointments, even imaginary ones. But then came the second Thursday. And the third. And by the fourth, something inside me unraveled. I wasn't just missing a stranger. I was mourning the one part of my week that felt like possibility. That quiet promise that life still had secrets to offer. That I wasn't completely invisible. That something, or someone, was still capable of stirring me. I stopped going to the bookstore after that. I couldn't stand the hollow echo of the door opening with no reward. The silence of the room without that scent curling through the air like an invitation. Instead, I threw myself into routine. Work. School pickups. Late-night dishes. Grocery lists. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That he was just a man. A tall man with a nice smell and a nice smile. Nothing more. But we don't miss people because of logic. We miss them because of what they made us feel. It wasn't until I wandered into the flower shop, completely by accident, that everything tilted again. I hadn't even planned to stop. I was walking home in a fog, turning corners on autopilot, when a display of white freesia caught my eye. They were my favorite. I stepped inside mostly for the scent, but also because I didn't want to go home just yet. And then I smelled it. The perfume. Stronger than before, like it had been waiting. I turned slowly, not even daring to believe it, and there he was. In the corner, speaking softly to the florist in French. He wore a navy coat this time, but everything else was exactly as I remembered. Same posture. Same gentle way of standing like he belonged in a painting. He was holding a bouquet, white freesia, wrapped in brown paper. He looked up. His face cracked into the biggest smile I'd ever seen on him. And then he laughed, a low, rich, surprised kind of laugh that made my knees go soft. I thought I'd lost you, he said. My voice caught in my throat, but I managed a breathless, I thought I was hallucinating. He took a step closer. No. I'm real. I laughed too. What else could I do? That's how our first real conversation began, right next to the freesia. A small miracle wrapped in scent and serendipity. We walked to a nearby park, the kind only locals knew, quiet, tucked behind a wall of flowering trees just past Pont d'Arts. The rain had stopped, but the world still shimmered with dampness, and the scent of wet earth mixed with spring blossoms. We sat on a wrought iron bench under an ancient chestnut tree, him with his bouquet of freesia on his lap, me clutching a paper cup of espresso I didn't remember buying. "I'm Louis," he said, finally, as if sharing a password. Spelled the French way. "I'm Elise," I replied, unsure of what else to offer. "Spelled the normal way, I guess." He laughed. "There's nothing normal about this, is there?" "No," I said honestly. "There really isn't." There was a long pause. Not awkward, just full. Like we were both soaking in the reality that we were no longer just glances and fragrance. We were people now. With names. With histories waiting just beneath the surface. He told me about the perfume. His mother had been a perfumer. Not professionally, but passionately. She used to mix scents in their kitchen when he was a boy, blending herbs and oils with a precision that bordered on religious. The perfume he wore was her favorite blend: jasmine, white freesia, and ginger. She said it reminded her of the ocean and old books, he said. Soft and smart at the same time. I didn't realize I was crying until he reached over and gently brushed my cheek with his thumb. "She passed when I was 16, he said softly. I wore it to feel close to her. But over time, it became something else. A way to remember to be soft in a world that keeps trying to make you hard." "That's beautiful," I whispered. He looked at me, really looked. I hoped someone would notice one day. Not the cologne. The intention. I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't notice. I followed. "Even better," he said, smiling. Then it was my turn. I told him about my kids, about the years I spent waiting for second lines on pregnancy tests, about a marriage that dried up slowly, like fruit left on the windowsill too long. I told him I'd forgotten what softness felt like. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just reached over and took my hand. We sat like that until the sun broke through the clouds and scattered gold across the cobblestones. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. There were no declarations, no swelling music. Just two people sitting with the honest ache of their pasts, sharing the quiet thrill of finding something unexpected. When we finally got up to leave, he pressed the bouquet of freesia into my hands. "For your kitchen," he said. "Maybe you'll mix something of your own someday." I didn't know it then, but that day would become the anchor point in my memory. The day we stepped out of the shadows of our sadness and into each other's light. Things didn't unfold like a romance novel. There were no grand overtures, no sudden passion sweeping us off our feet. What we had instead was quiet. Slow. Measured, like learning to speak again in a language you used to know but hadn't practiced in years. We didn't call it dating. At least, not out loud. We called it meeting up, or walking, or running into each other, even though we both knew we were choosing it. Choosing each other. Every Thursday turned into a ritual. We'd meet outside the bookstore, no longer pretending to browse. Sometimes we walked. Sometimes we read. Sometimes we sat in a cafe for hours saying nothing important, just filling the silence with presence. He never rushed me. Never pushed. He seemed to understand instinctively that I was still assembling myself, piece by fragile piece. That my life wasn't just a solo story, it was a whole chaotic novel, co-authored by two children who demanded every ounce of my attention. He asked about them often. Not in a curious, polite way. In a way that made it clear he wanted to know them, too. One afternoon, he brought a stack of picture books. He didn't even ask if he could. He just said, "I thought maybe they'd like these." One was in French. One was a pop-up. One was Harold and the Purple Crayon, which I'd mentioned in passing weeks ago. I hadn't realized he was listening. My daughter took to him instantly. She called him Le Monsieur, like a character out of one of her storybooks. She would twirl around the living room, announcing that Le Monsieur is coming, and race to the window like he was Santa Claus. My son, older and more cautious, watched him carefully. But Louis was patient. He never tried too hard. Never acted like a stepdad or a friend, just a presence. Solid. Quiet. Consistent. He once brought over a puzzle, one of those 1,000-piece monsters. Sat on the floor with both kids for hours while I made dinner in a rare moment of peace. He didn't look at his phone once. That was the thing about Louis. He didn't try to dazzle. He didn't perform. He just showed up, again and again, in little ways that made the ordinary feel sacred. He didn't ask what I needed. He just seemed to know. Once, when I was feeling especially frayed, he showed up at my door with a loaf of sourdough, a tiny jar of sea salt, and a wedge of brie. For a proper grown-up snack, he said. You deserve one. He made me laugh, not with jokes, but with how earnestly he believed in small comforts. In showing up. In rituals. That scent he wore, it began to mean something different to me. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what he represented. Softness. Steadiness. The idea that someone could exist in your life not to fix it, not to complete it, but to hold space in it. Some nights, when the kids were asleep and the house was finally quiet, I'd sit with one of the scarves he'd worn and just inhale. I know how that sounds. But when your life has been an endless chorus of needs you have to meet alone, breathing in something that reminds you you're not alone anymore? That's medicine. Louis never asked me to be anything I wasn't. He never expected my life to shrink to fit his. He just walked in and made space beside me. That, I realized, was the kind of love I hadn't known I needed. It happened on a gray Sunday morning. The kids were with their dad, a rare weekend he actually showed up, and I had the apartment to myself. I should have been resting, catching up on laundry, or just basking in the quiet. But instead, I found myself cleaning. Deep cleaning. The kind you only do when you're trying not to think too hard about something. I was organizing the tiny hall closet when I found it, a wooden box tucked behind a stack of old photo albums and a broken toaster. I didn't remember buying it, but I must have picked it up during one of my vintage market strolls. It was beautiful. Worn edges, brass hinges, carved with an intricate floral pattern. Something about it felt significant. I opened it and found letters. Dozens of them. All written in the same careful, slanted handwriting. At first, I thought they were someone else's. But then I recognized the signature. Louis. Each letter was addressed, Cher Maman. I didn't mean to read them. I truly didn't. But my eyes caught a few lines, and I was gone. I sat on the floor, cross-legged in the dust, and let his world pour over me. The letters were dated, spanning years. Some were written when he was still a teenager, fresh in grief. Others came from his 20s, long after he'd moved to Paris. They chronicled heartbreaks, lonely Christmases, moments of quiet joy. He told her everything, about the books he was reading, the friends he made and lost, the jobs he quit, the cafes he loved. He wrote about his fears. His longing to find someone who saw the world the way she had. Someone who would understand why scent mattered. Why softness was strength. Why certain songs made you cry, even if you didn't know the lyrics. He wrote about me, too. At first, just hints. I saw her again today. She didn't see me, but I watched her pause near the biographies and laugh at something on her phone. Her laugh is the kind that softens the whole room. Later, she came into the flower shop. I nearly dropped the freesia. I told her I thought I'd lost her. She laughed like it was the most obvious thing in the world, that of course we'd find each other again. And then, I'm afraid. She's been hurt. And I don't want to be another weight. But I can't stop thinking about the way she looks when she's reading, how she bites the inside of her cheek when she's concentrating. I want to be the reason she exhales. I stopped reading after that. Not because it was too much, but because it was exactly enough. I closed the box and placed it carefully back on the shelf. I didn't tell Louis I'd read them. Not then. Not for a long time. I wanted to honor what those letters were, sacred spaces between a boy and his mother, still echoing in the man he'd become. But something changed in me after that. I understood why he moved the way he did. Why he never rushed. Why he always chose his words with such care. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was living in conversation, with memory, with love, with loss. With her. And now, maybe, with me. That night, when he came over, I didn't mention the letters. Instead, I made soup from scratch, lit a candle, and let him talk about the book he'd just finished. He spoke with his hands, eyes alight, quoting lines he loved. I watched him, this man full of quiet thunder and secret letters, and thought, I'm falling. I wasn't ready to say it. Not out loud. But I think he knew anyway. It was almost summer when he told me. We were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, wine glasses in hand, watching the city yawn into twilight. The kids were asleep, finally. I could still hear the faint hum of their fan down the hall. Louis had brought over a bottle of white, chilled just right, and a tiny tart he claimed was the best in Paris. I didn't argue. We ate it with spoons straight from the tin. That's when he said it. I'd been offered a position, he said, casually at first. In Montreal. The words floated into the air and just hung there. I didn't speak. Not right away. He watched me, carefully, waiting for the impact to register. It's a consulting role. Good money. They want me to help restructure a publishing house. 6 months, maybe more. I nodded slowly, my heart crawling up my throat. That's great, I said, too quickly. Really great. You should do it. He didn't answer. The silence between us stretched thin, vibrating with everything we weren't saying. I looked out over the rooftops, trying not to cry. It wasn't just the idea of him leaving. It was what it represented. The end of something I hadn't even fully let myself name. I'd built careful walls around this feeling, kept it quiet, manageable. And now, it was slipping through my fingers. I wasn't going to tell you, he admitted. I was going to take the job and go. Clean break. But I couldn't. You deserve to know. I swallowed hard. And now that I do. He looked down at his wine, then back at me. Now I'm not sure I can go. That broke me. I stood up, pacing the balcony like I was trying to walk away from the ache. Louis, you can't stay for me. That's not fair. You've worked hard for this. You should go. But I don't want to, he said. Not if it means losing this. Losing you. I stopped. Faced him. You don't even have me. That made him flinch. I'm still half broken, I whispered. Still figuring out how to be someone's person again. I don't know how to love someone without apologizing for it. And I'm scared, of needing you, of my kids needing you. And then one day, you realizing it's too much. I already realized it's a lot, he said quietly. And I'm still here. I stared at him. He stood up then, closing the space between us, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. You don't have to be ready. You don't have to fix yourself for me. I'm not asking for a promise, Elise. Just a chance. And if I have to go, I'll go. But I'll come back. That's not a line, I mean it. We didn't kiss that night. We just sat again, side by side, his arm barely touching mine. And when he left, I didn't walk him to the door. He left for Montreal the next week. No dramatic goodbye. No last-minute declarations. Just a long hug and a whispered, I'll see you. I didn't believe him. Weeks passed. The bookstore felt empty. The scent haunted me in the oddest places, a scarf rack, a stranger's coat on the metro, even a bakery where the ginger cookies made me dizzy with longing. I started to forget the exact tone of his voice, but the way he made me feel? That stayed sharp. And then one morning, my daughter screamed, "Le monsieur is back." I rushed to the window, half thinking she was mistaken. But there he was. On the sidewalk. Freesia in hand. He looked up. Saw me. And smiled like he'd never been gone. He didn't even knock. I flung open the door before he could raise his hand, and for a moment we just stood there, staring. Me in an oversized t-shirt, my daughter clinging to my leg, my son peering from behind the hallway wall, suspicious and quiet. Louis, on the threshold, holding a bouquet of freesia wrapped in wax paper, his coat still damp from the morning rain. "You came back," I said, like an accusation, like a prayer. "I told you I would," he said softly. He stepped inside, smelling like ginger and pine and jet lag. The kids barreled toward him, yelling, tugging at his sleeves, as if he'd simply returned from the grocery store and not an entire country away. He knelt down, hugged them both. My heart did something slow and terrifying. Later, when they were occupied with a new puzzle he'd brought from Canada, we sat on the couch, side by side, our knees just touching. "I couldn't stay," he said. "I tried. But everything I did, everything I saw, it felt muted. Like I'd gone colorblind." "You left for something important." "I came back for something more important." I didn't know what to say. I'd spent weeks building walls again, convincing myself he was a moment, not a movement. I'd tried to turn my feelings into a story I could fold away. And yet, here he was. Breaking every quiet rule I'd set. We didn't kiss right away. That came later, after dinner, after the dishes, after the kids had gone to bed, after I stood in the kitchen drying my hands and he walked in behind me, took the towel from me, and just looked. "I missed your kitchen," he whispered. "My kitchen missed you." He reached up, brushed a hair behind my ear, and I closed my eyes. The kiss wasn't cinematic. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was deliberate. Like he'd been memorizing my presence for months and was now mapping it with his mouth. Afterward, we stood in the soft hum of the fridge, the scent of freesia still lingering in the air. He held me against his chest, and I let myself be small. I let my breath slow. I let the weight of everything I'd carried for years soften. And then he said something I'll never forget. "I didn't come back to finish a chapter, Elise. I came back to start the book." It took me a second to realize he meant it, not as a metaphor, but as a promise. Over the next few weeks, we found our rhythm again. He worked remotely, setting up his laptop on my kitchen island while I wrangled laundry and life. He helped with school drop-offs when I overslept. He started leaving notes in my pockets. "Remember, your coffee tastes better than the bakery's. You look beautiful, even in grocery store lighting." He didn't try to insert himself into our life. He simply aligned with it. Like a seam finally matching up after years of pulling at the edges. One evening, I came home late and found him asleep on the couch, my daughter curled on his chest, my son using his legs as a pillow, a book lying open on his lap. I stood in the doorway for a long time, trying to memorize the moment. This quiet joy I never thought I'd get to have. I used to believe I'd never feel at home with a man again. That all I had left was survival and occasional laughter. But Louis, he made it feel possible. Not because he tried to rescue me. Because he saw me. All of me. And stayed anyway. It had been exactly 1 year since I followed the scent on Rue de l'Université. A full circle. A beginning that didn't look like one at the time. I hadn't planned to mark the anniversary, Louis didn't even know I'd remembered the date, but as I stood at my dresser that morning, my fingers hesitated over a tiny bottle nestled in the corner of the drawer. His mother's perfume. He'd given it to me a few months earlier, tucked in a linen pouch with a handwritten note. "In case you ever want to know what it's like to walk in a memory," it said. I'd never worn it. It felt too intimate, too sacred. But that morning, something shifted. I dabbed a little on my wrists, behind my ears, the way he'd taught me. The scent bloomed, floral, warm, with that bite of ginger that made it so unmistakably his. Or hers. Or now, ours. I didn't tell him. I made breakfast, dropped the kids off, ran errands. All day I moved through the city like normal, but everything was charged. The scent followed me like a second skin. I wondered if anyone else noticed it, if they turned slightly the way I once had on a rainy sidewalk in Paris. That evening, he walked in the door with 2 baguettes tucked under one arm, humming something French and off-key. He kissed my cheek in passing, set the bread on the counter, and stopped mid-step. He turned slowly. Wait. I smiled, playing dumb. Something wrong? He stepped closer, his nose twitching like he was trying to solve a riddle his heart already understood. You're wearing it, he said softly. I shrugged. Maybe. He was quiet for a long moment. And then, he laughed. That rare, breathless kind of laugh he only gave when he was completely undone. He wrapped his arms around me and buried his face in my neck. It smells different on you. Good different? He pulled back, eyes soft, voice barely above a whisper. No. Heartbreakingly perfect. We stood like that for what felt like forever. Later that night, after dinner and bedtime stories and one final plea for water from the 4-year-old, we curled up on the couch with a blanket between us. He rested his hand over mine and said, I think my mother would have liked you. That caught me off guard. Why? Because you see the world the way she did. With your whole chest. You don't just survive. You feel. I blinked quickly. That's not always a good thing. He turned, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. It's the only thing that matters. He told me stories about her that night, how she used to smell everything before she bought it, produce, books, clothes. How she once made a custom perfume for a stranger on a train just because she looked like she needed to remember something sweet. How she believed our 5 senses were roads back to the soul. That night, I fell asleep with the scent still on my skin, his heartbeat steady under my ear. And I dreamed of Rue de l'Université. Not as a place where I was lost, but where I began to be found. 2 years later, we lived together. Not because it was the next logical step, not because the lease on my old place ran out, but because it became impossible to imagine waking up without his hand finding mine under the sheets. Because love, real love, is not a thing you stumble upon and frame like art. It's a practice. A rhythm. A quiet, everyday choosing. Every morning, he still wears the scent. Every morning, it greets me before I open my eyes fully, soft jasmine, ginger, memory. And every morning, I fall in love all over again. Not in the fireworks way. Not in the sweeping, storybook way. In the real, aching, this is my life now way. He makes breakfast with music playing. Always something old, Ella Fitzgerald, Jacques Brel, Nina Simone. My daughter dances barefoot on the tiles while the cat twines between his legs. My son leans at the counter, quizzing him about everything from constellations to the best way to sharpen a pencil. Louis answers like it all matters. Because to him, it does. We still have chaos. School runs, forgotten lunches, stomach bugs, lost shoes. I still get snappy when I'm overtired. He still leaves socks in weird places. Sometimes we argue, quietly, intensely, and always with that underlying promise, I'm not going anywhere. I never imagined a man could feel like rest. Sometimes, when I'm folding laundry or wiping down the kitchen table, I catch sight of him across the room. He'll be reading with my daughter curled up in his lap, or organizing my son's science fair supplies, or just leaning in the doorway with that same knowing smile he gave me in the bookstore years ago. And I think, how did I ever survive without this? I tell him I love him often, and he tells me back in 1,000 small ways. In how he refills my coffee cup before I ask. In how he replaces the batteries in the kids' toys before they whine. In how he never stops noticing me, even when I'm a mess. Especially when I'm a mess. One night last winter, I had a full breakdown. Everything had hit me at once: deadlines, sick kids, dishes, exhaustion. I stood in the kitchen, shaking, trying not to cry in front of anyone. Louis took one look at me, walked over, and pulled me into the laundry room. Closed the door. Held me while I sobbed into his shirt. He didn't say, "It's going to be okay." He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. That's when I knew. Love isn't about someone making you better. It's about someone loving you even when you're at your worst, and standing in that mess with you, unflinching. We're not perfect. We're wildly different people with wildly different histories. Sometimes we step on each other's bruises by accident. But we always come back. We always talk. We always try. A few weeks ago, I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at a small velvet box. He looked up, nervous. I was going to wait. But I can't. He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a tiny freesia carved into the band. "I don't want a big wedding," he said. "Or a perfect plan. I just want a life with you." I didn't say yes. I threw my arms around him and cried until I couldn't breathe. And then I whispered, "You already have it." So yeah. I followed a stranger's perfume through the rain once. And it led me home.